This is Nilanjana Maulik from Alzheimer's and Related Disorders Society of India, that is ARDSI Calcutta Chapter. It is a registered organization in Bengal since year 1999, and one that extends care and support to people living with dementia and their family members. This session today is part of the World Alzheimer's Month campaign to raise awareness of dementia as a condition and to remember the unforgettable journeys of those who have lived, living right now, and will in days to come with dementia. This conversation is also a step to reframe the way we see people with dementia and their caregivers. It is a joint effort of ARDSI Calcutta and Mental Health Foundation Kolkata, and it gives me immense pleasure to introduce the speakers for the evening. Dr. Joyranjan Ram, Co-Director of Mental Health Foundation Kolkata, and Dr. Amitabh Ghosh, President of ARDSI Calcutta. Welcome to you both and grateful for your time today. To you audience, thank you for joining us. You can type your comments, questions on the chat box while the event is on. So what we will do is at the end of the event, we will read them out to the speakers to answer. Thank you so much. Now, with over 50 million people living with dementia around the world and 5.2 million in India, along with a prediction that these numbers will increase by leaps and bounds, the question is, how are we preparing to face this epidemic as an individual and a community as a whole? Dementia has a huge impact on the individual. I meet people who say, so people with dementia can't remember anything, right? I have to tell them that that's not true. In fact, they can remember a lot more than you think they would. So living with dementia and dealing with society's view of the condition often means that people with dementia lose confidence, independence, and the ability to live the life they want. The caregivers, while caring for their loved ones with dementia, are also equally frustrated by the inability of the person to communicate their thoughts and remember faces and names. The disease eventually takes away independence, so caregivers become the feet, hands, and mind of the people with dementia. While the caregiving journey can be rewarding, it is no secret that it can also be extremely challenging. And as the disease progresses, it becomes easier to forget that the person with dementia is still there, alive. Yet, very little is known about how much people in India know about dementia. How do the ones who have it and the ones who care for them cope with it? How do the relationships, the identities change through the illness and the loss? From the husband who wakes up at 2 in the morning to take his wife to the toilet, to the sons and daughters who dedicates hours of care for their parents, and the wives who wish they had 36 hours at hand, life is indeed upside down for most. But despite all these challenges, caring for and loving someone with dementia can be extremely rewarding. And although it may not be obvious, the person is still there behind the disease. And someone by the name of Nesta, aged 68 with Alzheimer's disease, reassures that when she says, and I quote her, "We might not be the ones to change the world. We might not be something the whole world would rejoice about, but in the little corners that we live, in the lives that we have played a part in, we should be nothing but unforgettable." Friends, for the next hour or so, I shall be in conversation with both our speakers and bring up topics that will range from medical interventions to care approaches in dementia. I will begin with you, Dr. Ghosh, if you allow. As a doctor, if you were to have dementia, what would be the challenges you would face in your personal and professional life?
Well, obviously, the first and most important challenge I would face, you asked what I would face if I had dementia. So dementia takes away the brain function abilities of my, in me. So my memory, the way I turn to the right or turn to the left, or where I know people, where I recognize them, where I know their names, the way I behave with them, everything changes slowly with time. And as a result of that, that takes a progressive but relentless loss of my day-to-day functioning. You said as a doctor. So the first thing that we will start losing is the ability to take decisions, the ability to remember things, remember medicines, ability to remember doses, decision making, and gradually new learning will be lost. You know, in medical practice, it all depends on continuous new learning. So that will be lost. So essentially, the entire the professional aspect of me, I shall be losing. So that is number one. And secondly, of course, as a person in the society and in the family, for similar reasons, I shall be losing. I shall be losing my day-to-day functioning, my interactions in the family. And I will tell you, as one of the most practical things that patients with dementia, they lose even before they recognize that, or the family recognizes that they have dementia, is the ability to believe in people. So one of the first things you have very frequently is that you suspect people. You lose money and you start believing that someone in your house has actually cheated you and has taken that from you. And it's very difficult to reconcile because you have housemates and this and that in our society, as you know. And it's very difficult then to reconcile with the fact and say, oh no, you need to see a doctor. Just because I said that, I think somebody is taking my money away. And my family member says, you need to see a doctor, something is wrong. That is not the done thing, you can't do that. So you naturally believe what your father or your mother says.
Right.
And that stretches the progression of the disease because you're not taking that person to the doctor because you really believe that, you probably are getting rid of the housemaid or two housemates, but you're still not going to the doctor. So that is one thing which you lose first. And then you start forgetting things and, I would lose the name of the family members, the recognition, people who have not been, there's someone in the US who has come after 1 year and I don't recognize my grandson or my granddaughter because I haven't seen for a long time. So the interactions, your network breaks down, your social, your professional, your family. And at relatively young ages, you start losing to earn. So there's a huge societal loss.
Huge impact. Yes. So there is a lot of research that points out to the early detection benefits. If someone knew early on that they had dementia, how would that help them as a person and their family to continue living their life?
Well, that's a very important question, not very easy to answer, but I will break it in two ways. As our current understanding of dementia stands, and for the audience, let me tell you, sometimes we shall be using the word dementia, sometimes Alzheimer's disease. It is interchangeable, but they're not the same. Probably you have heard about Alzheimer's disease a lot more than you've heard of dementia. Dementia means progressively forgetting things, progressively losing the ability to function properly. Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia that we know about, but there are other causes too. Dementia can happen in patients with stroke, for example, and those with strokes in the family know how people can sometimes forget. There are other types of dementias called frontotemporal dementias where behavior is affected, and so many other types of dementia. But for today, I think I will be using that interchange. So what we currently understand is that we do not have the treatment for dementia that will cure the disease, at least to the extent that we can cure, within inverted commas, diabetes. So we control it very, very well. And there are certain rules and regulations. If you follow, your diabetes is not going to get too worse over the next 20, 30 or 40 years. Or blood pressure, for example. So there are good treatments for that, by which we can control that. For dementia, most of the research has gone in Alzheimer's disease for the last 20, 30 years. We have not come to that stage. And therefore, when dementia is diagnosed by the doctor, from then on, there's a slow downhill progression of the illness, right? And I told you the effect of the illness in the answer to the previous question. So you progressively lose all your abilities.
Right, right.
So currently, globally, the researchers are trying to understand how we can catch something very, very early. So if we can catch something very, very early, maybe we will have better mechanisms in place, not to prevent the progression of disease, but to slow down the progression of disease. To make sure that the person who would be completely forgetful and totally incapacitated in 5 years, maybe we can extend that to about 10 years or 12 years or 15 years. Mm-hmm. That is the target. So that is one important thing that for which early diagnosis is for. There are a lot of research is going on in that. I'll give you a simple example, which I frequently do. I was talking about diabetes. So, before diabetes, about 5 to 10 years goes, where you have this condition called pre-diabetes. In pre-diabetes, you're not a diagnosed diabetic, but this blood level of this thing called HbA1c or glycosylated hemoglobin goes up, but doesn't go up to the extent that it goes up in diabetes. Many pre-diabeteses can be controlled, and the diabetes can either be completely stopped from happening or it can be delayed, simply by food and exercise and so on and so. For example, the other example is arthritis. If you have joint pain at the age of 50 and you're regularly doing your exercises and the physiotherapy and all the things which the doctors will say, you probably will not have to change the joint. Or if you do, maybe it will be another 10, 15 years later. So the human body is the same. So the rules of the human body should also be the same. Keeping that in mind, the same thing should apply for dementia. So if I diagnose early forgetfulness very early, and then I do certain things by which I can delay the diagnosis of dementia, that is what we are currently working a lot on. Right. The other part, I said there are two parts. The other part is to recognize that you are forgetting. You will be more motivated to do all these things to stop forgetfulness or delay that. And secondly, you can plan out your life. You can plan out your finances. You can plan out your strategies. What is going to do? Should something happen to me? Should I forget more? A lot of people in this COVID, especially old people like us, in this COVID age, you don't know what is going to happen tomorrow, are preparing their finances. They prepare just in case I have a COVID and in 2 days I'm going to the hospital. What will happen to my family? I think that is a clever way of thinking. And I think in dementia, while my mind is working very well and I'm forgetting a little bit here and there, I think that is this time when, you can strategize your finances, you can do your will, you can do whatever you like, so many other things. So there are two reasons why early diagnosis and early recognition is important.
Right. Thank you so much. How much do you think is happening in this regard in India, in our country, the early diagnosis, I mean?
Well, unfortunately, not much. And as I told you in one example, that one of the early things is so one is suspiciousness. I told you, suspect family members. And you don't know. It is no fault of the family member at all. They just think normally. They don't think Alzheimer's disease in their mind when they hear their parents complaining. Right? That's stupid.
Yeah.
So they think normally, and by thinking normally, they they try to explore and find out exactly what is happening, and is there really something is getting lost frequently, and so and so. So by the time they realize that it is not the case, other things have happened, and there are more evidences that the person is forgetting. So that is one thing. The other thing is late anxiety and and depression. So a person who is otherwise fine and great and a fantastic person, enjoying life, starts developing anxiety later on in life, or depression later on in life, frequently after retirement, or children's marriages. And there are so many other little small triggers. The triggers are not the cause of dementia, but they trigger off the process in the brain which eventually leads to dementia. So things like that are normal. And remember, most people with late anxiety or late onset depression, or even with people who are thinking they're forgetting things here and there, will never ever have dementia. That's very important to remember. Only a small number of people will have dementia. But so to recognize that is what is important, and that is not recognized. And I appreciate why it is not recognized. But we have to, the families, the community, the people who are listening today, will have to recognize that there can be early signs of forgetfulness, just like the pre-diabetes and the early joint pains and the creaky joints. There will be early signs of forgetfulness which should not be ignored. It could be forgetting. Forgetting names, by the way, is very common. Yeah. So don't panic just because you're forgetting names. It's very, very common with age. But if the forgetfulness exceeds that, if they do things which you shouldn't do, you can't find your key, or we misplace mobiles, we misplace glasses. That's pretty common. But suppose we misplace mobiles and we find out that I've kept the mobile inside the fridge, or I've kept the mobile inside my, my cupboard or wardrobe. And that happens more than once. But then, there should be a bell ringing and you should get in touch. So any forgetfulness which you think, it's a bit too much, I think I should get checked at the earliest. So family issues, that should be. So I think early diagnosis is a huge is deficit area, not only in India,
it's all over the world.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Now, facing stigma is often a primary concern for people living with dementia and their caregivers. Those with the disease report being misunderstood because of the myths and misconceptions others have about the disease. Dr. Ram, as an individual having experienced dementia both professionally and personally, I would like to know your thoughts on this issue, this misconception and stigma that is, surrounding the condition, this dementia.
Firstly, thank you, Nilanjana, for asking me to join this program. And as you said, I will be speaking as a carer, really, having lived with dementia of my mother. I just wanted to say a few things, regarding stigma, lack of awareness. Like Amitabh said, I feel that Indian society, this whole concept of old age being, although you are respected, but you are this concept of vanaprastha, that you have kind of completed your life's job and therefore you are redundant and therefore you no longer need to work or use your brain, has in some way, I feel, has increased our ignorance about dementia, because it has decreased our expectation from elderly people. So if they forget a bit, if they are a bit cranky, if they are doing a bit of odd things, then we say ki satya gaya hai, thoda budhapa aa gaya hai, and we take it in our stride. But as you said, it's I think it's an epidemic challenge which we are very, very ill equipped to face. And I experienced it firsthand over last few years with my mother, who passed away about 2.5 years ago. I think our awareness about dementia is incredibly poor. And I really can't blame the community for it, but I would like to blame ourselves, the community of physicians, for it, because trust me, my knowledge of dementia, and Amita Buddha will vouch for it, when we were medical students, was zero. I knew a lot about, uh, malaria, dengue, infectious diseases, maybe some very, very exotic diseases which never occurred, and we would be very excited to see those in the wards. But our own knowledge about dementia has been exceptionally poor. And I have absolutely no shame in acknowledging that my education in dementia started pretty late. Fortunately, because I was working in a hospital where the dementia services, singularly due to Dr. Ghosh's work, has been exemplary. So I was in a way forced to learn about dementia and learn the deeper nuances, and also then having seen my mother go through it. And also as my professional role as a psychiatrist, I gradually learned a lot more. So I think the onus of increasing awareness, decreasing stigma, has to rest with the professionals largely, who are incredibly supported by organizations such as yours. And you will know, you know more than me, and maybe you will not be able to acknowledge it in a public meeting, but the knowledge of physicians about dementia uh, is at times saddening. And I have had numerous conversations with Amita Buddha where I've been very agitated really, and gone and told him that, do something to increase awareness, do something, because it's really painful to see families suffer so much, where I feel that a bit of knowledge, a bit of information would really help them to manage the whole disease process effectively. Fortunately, mm, we know many instances of elder abuse, but I think fortunately still society here respects or tries to care for elderly people in the best manner they can. And I think families still are our greatest resources. So therefore, if we somehow can increase awareness about dementia, that these are the minimum bits you can do, these are the things each of us can do to keep the person and the family happy, content, support each other, I think that would be a huge, job done. Um, Stigma is primarily because of we don't understand a lot of things. I remember very clearly something which is very shocking. And again, I would be talking primarily from my personal experiences. I still remember uh, I once saw a teacher in our medical college in a very, very disheveled state outside his home in Salt Lake. He and his elderly wife were living. He had quite advanced dementia, and he was one of those cult figures in our medical college. And I still remember the disappointment of seeing Sir after many years, after leaving medical college, after 25 or 27 years, when I was called out uh, to go and see him. And I will never forget the impact it had on me, because the image I had of him, and the image then I had of him, the snapshot I had of him 27 or 28 years later, uh, was just so shocking and saddening that I felt that we need to help our elderly people who are going through this terrible disease with a lot more dignity and humanity, really. And I hope through programs such as this and kind of organizations such as yours, we would be at least a bit successful.
Um, Talking about raising awareness and removing stigma, I heard of an eatery in Tokyo that goes by the name Restaurant of Order Mistakes. that was basically designed to reduce stigma and open up opportunities for people with dementia to be understood by the society. And the restaurant only hires waiters with dementia. And if you go there and have ordered your favorite dish, you may get your order wrong. But since you knew this upfront, it changes your perception about those with dementia, and the experience makes you realize that with a little bit of understanding on our part, people with dementia can be functioning members of the society.
No, no, absolutely.
And, yeah. And,
You know,
sorry, I just wanted to think that regarding overcoming stigma, do you think such creative ideas like the eatery in Tokyo would work in India? Can we do something like that?
I think so. You know, Nilanjan, again, speaking from personal experience, my mother lived with dementia for about 5 or 6 years. And I think we detected it, we suspected it around the age of 79. She passed away at 85. And I must say that the community around, and we lived very close by, we were not living with Ma. So we were just about 5 minutes away. And she was ably, very, very ably looked after by her carers. But the community around her, you know, the vegetable vendor, the grocery store, they all knew that my mother was forgetting things. And one of the standard things was about the fishmonger. So my mother, you know, she would buy fish, and then she would kind of, so they would come home and cut it in front of her, and then she would ask the price. And the fish, suppose the price was 100 rupees or 200 rupees. So my mother would say that, my God, you are robbing us, cheating us. So all of them, because she lived in 1960s, 70s when she bought fish. So they would say, so Ma would ask, Je, koto taka kore niyechish, Kartik? So and then Kartik would say, 5 taka kg ma. Whereas suppose it was 500 rupees kg. And Ma would be very happy and say, okay, then give us, 1 kg. So, and I think everyone around her, they knew that she had dementia and played along with the role that, you know, so our domestic help salary was about 1/100th of what she would be getting, because my mother felt that, you know, how can a maid servant get so much salary? Because in her days, it wasn't the norm. So I think people, if they are made aware, are capable of kindness and capable of showing kind of humanity, which, you know, time and again, we experience that. A couple of days ago only, you know, my mother-in-law, she lives with a maid servant, 83. She is elderly. She doesn't have dementia. Her fridge was not working. And my wife called the guy up and said that, look, and they had given a couple of days ahead the date. And my wife said that, requested, look, my mother is very elderly. She has medicines in the fridge. And actually he went and, you know, beyond the call of his duty and helped her out and sorted out the fridge. So I think we underestimate the generosity of strangers, particularly fortunately in our country. I think still there is a great, you know, scope for helping the elderly, only if we are able to give everyone the correct information.
I totally agree with you. Thank you so much. Coming to Dr. Ghosh, can you please share with us what is the process you follow when an individual presents himself or herself with dementia symptoms at your chamber?
Okay, so when the person comes to us, we have a set system. So basically it starts by me taking a detailed history. And when we take a history, either I do it myself or my colleague does it. So the detailed history is, it includes all different parts of the brain. So the brain, the so-called forgetting. So let me explain for the audience what happens exactly in the brain in dementia a little bit. So the brain works like a network, right? Where you have different major stations of the, so imagine the railway network. So these major big stations like Delhi, Bombay, Kolkata, and so on and so on. So the brain has these stations, each deals with their individual functions and connections. And then these big stations connect with the rest of the stations in the different parts of the brain. And everything works in perfect interaction, just like your railway networks. And in dementia, these networks start slowly degenerating because there are some abnormal proteins which are deposited in the brain. So these networks start breaking down with time. Now the different big stations, for example, one deals with pure memory. So like what I have eaten in the morning, or who came to visit me, or I'm going to the shop, I have 3 things to remember, or 5 things to remember, to keep them in mind, that what I'm going to buy. So pure memory. So that is one part of the brain. There's a thing called hippocampus, which deals with that. There's another part of the brain which deals with language, words, meaning of words, meaning of things in life, meaning of who I am, meaning of who you are, meaning this is an eyeglass, this is a shirt. So meaning of things, and indeed meaning of the whole world like that, meaning of relations. So there's part of the brain which deals with meaning of words, meaning of other things. There's another part of the brain which deals with which way I should go. Is this my right side? Is this my left side? Is it my front, my back? Is it, so all these relations. Is that your right side? Is that your left side? So when I give a direction to somebody, it is not in my context, it is in your context.
Absolutely.
So all of these spatial complexities, one part of the brain. Perception, that a rope looks like a rope, it is not a snake.
Mm-hmm.
A red round thing is a ball, another red round thing is an apple. Perception, another part of the brain which deals with that. Behavior, how I should conduct myself. I conduct in one way with my friends from childhood. I conduct in another way with my professional friends. I conduct in another way when I go and give a formal lecture on stage somewhere. Different places. If I go to an interview, different ways I have to conduct myself. I will not talk with my childhood friends in the way I will speak in an interview board. You wouldn't do that, would you?
Right.
So the way I behave, what is the right thing to behave? Everything is right, but what is right for that particular circumstance? Another very complex, interesting thing the brain does. So like this, the way I dress, how should I put my hand inside the shirt? How does someone cook? How does someone use the microwave or the mobile? So different parts of the brain has these major stations dealing with different things. And when they forget, they do not forget altogether. They forget one at a time. So one part breaks down. And when one part breaks down, slowly and slowly, its connections break down. The other parts try to make up. And when they fail to make up, then they start slowly degenerating as well. And then slowly and slowly, from the very earliest symptom of forgetfulness, which we did not care about, slowly and slowly, as you can understand how the entire dementia will progress. So when we take the history, we take this entire story. When was your first symptom? First test symptom. We keep pushing at that. And then what happened? And then what happened? And then what happened? So we take that history. We don't just let go by whatever the history comes to us. Mm-hmm. We keep pushing and pushing and pushing and going back and back and back. So we check that. We check for other causes potentially. So, there are many other diseases in the brain for which people can forget. It does not have to be Alzheimer's disease.
True.
We find out whether there are any causes like that. For example, stroke and many other brain diseases. I'm not going to go that. We check for thyroid, we check for vitamin deficiencies, what is your sugar like, and so on. So head injury and so on. So we take these histories. So after the detailed history like this is taken, then we go to the family history. We ask about families. We ask about anxiety, depression. We ask about, how they feel in their day-to-day. What is their social responsibilities? How are they managing? Who is going to the bank? Who is handling the money? How many people are there in the family? How many people can help? So the social, occupational part of the history. And then of course we have the medicines. What medicines are you taking? Frequently we see, unfortunately, too much medicines in patients. In fact, the brain can't handle too much medicines when it is shrinking and they're drying up. So less medicines are required. So those are the things we take in the history. And then of course we do what's in my center, not in every center, but we are a specialized center. So we do a thorough, what is called a neuropsychological, in general terms, a memory test. We do a memory test, which is kind of paper and pencil test, which my colleague does it. And we look at these things in further details there. Pick small things up. And then of course you need to do scans. You need to do an MRI scan. There are other scans, but the single most important and commonest scan for dementia is an MRI scan of the brain. There are special cuts which we have to do. We do blood tests to rule out other causes. So having done all these tests, we put everything together and then we come to a diagnosis. Is it dementia? Is it not dementia, but mild forgetfulness? Is it not even mild forgetfulness, or the patient is at risk of forgetfulness in the longer time, in the future? Or is it just, pure and simple anxiety and we haven't found anything, but we should carefully follow it up? So that is how we proceed, and then we, the treatment and everything starts.
Great. Thank you so much. Coming back to Dr. Ram, challenging behavior symptoms from a person with dementia are the hardest to deal with for the caregivers. I remember an incident from a few years back. This couple had planned a trip to the hills to enjoy their 45th anniversary and was to leave for the airport when the husband, who had frontotemporal dementia, asked his wife a question that brought their summer plans to an urgent halt and further tested the strength of their long marriage. Just the night before, he had talked excitedly about the trip with his wife. Then the next morning, as the wife packed her last things, he walked into the bathroom where she was and asked what she was doing. She said, "I'm packing my cosmetics and then I'm ready to go." She smiled at him. "But those are my wife's things," came the response from the husband. That response sent her into fits. She replied, "Oh, really? Good joke." Hearing this, the husband snatched the bag from her hand, saying, "Do not touch it. That's my wife's bag." His wife slapped him on the face. He hit her back. She shouted, called him names, and cried. Over the years, with my thousands of hours working with caregivers, both professionally and family, I have concluded that there are some characteristics in our behavior which are completely natural. In our everyday relationship, any one of them or a combination of it can cause harmony and argument, but are harmless as such. I'm talking about our habits to provoke, shout, scream, interrupt, contradict, undermine, ignore, and control, of course. Any one of these used in the presence of someone experiencing this massive confusion caused by the brain damage is a disaster. But as caregivers, we do what we do in our natural element, doing what comes naturally to us, throwing these habits into the confused world of our cared for person without much sensitive awareness. So I would like to hear from you the critical aspect that we face in dementia, the BPSD as per the medical dictionary. Your view on this, Dr. Ram, please.
Yeah, I think the behavioral symptoms are most difficult to address, isn't it? And we all know about that. Mm-hmm. In fact, as Dr. Ghosh was saying, judgment is affected, our recall is affected. I have seen people who have been married for about 55 years and they have forgotten who the person they are married to, and therefore are responding in very, very difficult manner, which, remember, the carers have to live, as you would be aware, have to live with it for 24 hours, 365 days in a year. Now, Unfortunately, I think we are not very well medically equipped uh, to deal with the behavioral symptoms in the manner we would like to. When I say medically equipped, I mean with medicines. There are medicines, they help to a certain extent, but often the expectations are not met. So, therefore, to a degree, these behavioral symptoms can be controlled, but again, to some extent, it can't be. Now, what is required often, I have seen families come up with quite elegant solutions, so they would mm, play along what the person is saying. So if it is a mistaken identity, they will create a story around a mistaken identity and kind of gently cajole the person to uh, go along with what they are proposing. There are a couple of things which I have learned while talking to families. One is that when a person with dementia is agitated and excited, the manner in which the family is responding, the manner in which the person with whom the agitation, towards whom the agitation is expressed, is responding, is actually one of the biggest therapeutic indicators whether the agitation will increase or decrease. So if the person at whom the aggression is directed is managing to stay calm, thoughtful, gentle, soothing, then many of these behavioral problems actually subside. And also the home environment, if there are, if there is help available for the main carer, then the carer is less burdened and able to deal with the behavioral symptoms in a much more energetic way. The problem is, as you would be aware, that many of the carers are so overburdened with looking after their spouses or looking after their parents that it is impossible to manage the tantrums, the behavior problems in a calm way. So I think carer respite is a very important thing. Medicines do play some role, and the manner in which the carers and the family is responding is also very important.
Right. Dr. Ghosh, when caregivers leave your office with a diagnosis of dementia, what is the list of community resources besides the medical interventions that you share with the family? And do you think it is important to do so?
I think yes, in patients who have got, as you know, we don't have a lot of community resources, unfortunately. So there are two things we have to do. One is, as Dr. Ram was just pointing out, tell the family, explain to the family the best way to deal with situations as much as we can. They give us situations and we hear them and we say, this is how it would have been better handled and you could try that. And the other thing is, of course, your organization, ARDSI, which I think is is the single organization which we have here and in large parts of India, who deal with dementia caregiving, especially patients who've got moderately advanced dementia onwards. Because end of the day, especially patients where dementia has progressed to a certain extent, it becomes difficult for the caregiver, who's frequently a spouse, who's frequently also of a certain age, by then older people, to cope. The fact that you don't recognize who I am, and yet I have to work my butts out for you day in, day night. I don't get any recognition for what I'm doing. And I get shouted at, and I don't know what to do. And you wake up at night 4 times, and I have to wake up with you. You soil the bed, and I have to clean the bed three times a night. You don't eat, and I have to spend 1 hour spending time giving you food. Or I make the food and you throw it away. You simply don't want to eat. After all my efforts, it's very frustrating. And they need help. And that help can be provided by organizations like you, and I hope there'll be much more organizations but they can do it in two ways. One is provide the support to the caregivers and teach them how to handle, sometimes reach their homes, which you do, and look at the situation and see what changes can be made and how things can be sorted out. And as well as give them respite. 24/7 duty of a caregiver becomes impossible after some time. So I think organizations where you have, like ARDSI has a daycare center, where you can take the patient, take care of them. And interestingly, these patients, when they come out of their house, because they're in a different environment, which is not the same routine which they're facing every day, they respond beautifully and do a lot of things which their family don't even expect them to do or they thought they would never do. And they just become another person. They can play, they can sing, they can chat, they can joke, they can do so many things. And I think you should come to the audience and demonstrate that one day what they do. So this is an organization we always every patient who has got that degree of dementia, which requires such, we definitely work with them. But unfortunately, very few organizations. We also lack a 24-hour service. There is one service in Kolkata who's doing fantastic work, but otherwise we also need a lot more 24/7 services.
Absolutely.
As you know, we're trying very hard.
Absolutely. Thank you. Dr. Ram, we all know, and you especially being one yourself, that caregivers play a key role in the quality of life of a person with dementia. However, the needs of carers are hardly assessed after the diagnosis. They are told to and expected to do everything and with perfection. Carers often do not know who to turn to for right information, as well as suffering from the enormous guilt when they feel angry or lonely or can't cope. Most of them end up with multiple health and emotional issues. What are some of the pointers you wished you had when you started the journey and, along the way?
I consider myself to be extraordinarily lucky, really, because I had the help of a lot of people, organizations such as yours. I could speak to Amitabh. So really, but unfortunately, majority of people are not as fortunate as I have been. Essentially, Nilanjani, one of the problems I feel is that because of lack of awareness, many carers do not understand that they are having to cope with something which is extraordinary. Because many people feel that this is old age and I am duty bound to look after my parents and or my spouse in their old age. This is normal. So therefore, if I cannot deal with the tantrum or behavioral issues which come up, I'm a bad son, I'm a bad mother, or I'm a bad wife. So therefore, they internalize everything. They don't reach out for help. They don't kind of say that I'm unable to manage all these. Because remember, again, it's a 24-hour, 365 day job. And also remember, the carers themselves are getting old. They themselves, if they are a spouse, they themselves are getting old. They have their own health problems. I have had families where the spouse has cancer, the other person has dementia, and the spouse is receiving chemotherapy and there is hardly any help. Now, just imagine the burden of looking after someone with dementia when you yourself are going through chemotherapy. So again, I think, as we said, that organizations such as yours, asking friends, families to help in, but they would be only able to help in if we reach out and if they knew what kind of a problem in dementia happens. So I think somehow or the other, couple of things need to happen. One is carer themselves need to acknowledge that feeling tired and depressed is very normal. They can seek help, they can seek advice, they can actually receive treatment for their depression, anxiety if they are unable to cope. they can reach out to other expert carers, they can reach out to other organizations like yourselves, or read more about dementia, and also reach out to, if available, close friends and families who may be able to help. So I think there has to be a multi-pronged approach where we involve as many people in supporting the carer, so that the carer is then able to support the person with dementia more effectively. And I have seen, if the carer himself or herself is relaxed and is more energetic, then the life of the person with dementia actually improves a lot. They have less behavior problems, they have less tantrums. I don't know whether it has reflected in your work, but in my own clinical experience and in my own personal journey, I have seen that if the home environment is calm, uh, peaceful, maybe a bit of humor, banter, then the person with dementia also feels relaxed and settled. So I think that is to be the main message really, that the carers themselves need to address their anxiety, depression, tiredness, fatigue, and ask for help rather than feel guilty about it.
Right. So when you talked about humor, that reminded me, the books tell us to advise caregivers to change their approaches as per need of the situation, Now, my experience has taught me otherwise. I remember showing a wife once how to sing along and use humor when situation gets challenging with her husband, who had very early onset Alzheimer's disease. I was visiting the couple one day early morning, and three of us sat, and she shared how he was once so musical and was in love with Asha Bhosle, and now had no response to life whatsoever, except his eyes that, sometimes moved to sounds. And this made her sad, sometimes angry, frustrated. As she finished, I turned to him, and looking straight into his eyes, I broke into Asha Bhosle's "Chokhe chokhe kotha bolo, mukhe kichu bolo na, eki cholo na." I saw a smile, and then his reply, "Ja bolechen." That day, I sure did make him happy, but not the wife. Because as I turned my head back to look at her, I could see a look saying, from myself, I wanted to show her that, you see how smooth and easy it was. But she thought that I was the craziest person on earth. And she said, "You expect me to do that with him?" So how do we motivate, family caregivers, the spouses, to bring in this humor? Because I have tried to, because I think those tense situations, they really cannot break into a song or, bring a humor. And, but then, you keep on trying. But your take on this?
No, I don't think it is easy. I don't think it is easy. I have felt frustrated. I have felt annoyed. When I couldn't kind of understand, my mother's illness regarding behavioral symptoms. So I would never ever dare to say that it's an easy job and, humor is something which we can use, because see, after all, we are also human beings who have our own stresses and anxieties, and therefore, but again, caring for dementia is a long journey. It's a very long journey. There will be numerous ups and downs, highs and lows. But ultimately, I think in our mind, we have to remember that this is a long race. This is a marathon where we have to conserve our energy, use our emotions wisely. Because if we are too overwrought, if we are too anxious, if we are too upset, we will burn ourselves out. So therefore, the request is to remember the person, also the good days, what kind of things he or she likes, and try and at times tap into it. Because primarily it's like a marathon, which you really cannot run like a 100 meters race where you are giving all your emotions into caring. So there has to be a, what would I say, a dispassionate way of handling the behavioral problems of dementia, and try and see how we can work around it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the commonest problems, which I find in behavioral problems is that the person, particularly men, will refuse to seek help because
Mm-hmm.
of their pride from other carers. So either it has to be the son or a daughter or the wife, and now they themselves may be tired, overworked, and will not be able to look after their fathers, and the fathers would refuse help from anyone else. So how do we work around them? How do we kind of convince them? It is a challenge, and by no way I would even dare to suggest that we can use humor all the time, because but I think we have to
Yes.
keep this in mind and really remember the spirit of the person, and go along.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think as professional caregivers, it's easier for us to, try these approaches because there isn't a personal relationship, and therefore I'm not bringing
Absolutely.
in preconceived, ideas around the person. So I see the person as he is or she is. I think it's easier for the professionals to do that rather
Absolutely.
than, the
So
family.
that's why I mentioned this, use this word dispassionate, because
Mm-hmm.
see, dementia, it's also a heartbreaking thing for the carer, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
mm, it is a heartbreaking thing. So when your wife of 52 years is not able to recognize you, when someone you have shared all your entire life's intimate journey is not able to recognize you, when a mother is not able to recognize her son, these are intense moments of sadness. I remember uh, my mother was always very particular about birthdays, and there is this in one of the birthdays, it's about 5 or 6 years when I realized that she actually now has dementia. She called me up in the morning and wished me. Uh, and I thought she has done it spontaneously. What I didn't realize that my sister-in-law from USA had reminded her that it is my birthday, so therefore she had called. And our plan was to have dinner together, because that was a working day. And later in the day, at around 8:30 or so, when we arrived for having the dinner together, she had forgotten and had eaten her dinner. And then she made up. This story that she was so hungry, therefore she had eaten. But I
Mhm.
realized that she had forgotten her son's birthday,
Mhm.
which was a period of sadness for me. But that is how you accept, and that is how for people who are around them, it is also not only tiredness, depression, but it is also sadness for them, which
Absolutely.
needs to be acknowledged.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree with you. Thank you so much. Dr. Ghosh, with pandemic changing how we function now and in future, do you consider continuing to explore technology to deliver treatment, which you're doing right now? And I would like to hear from you the pros and cons of you as a doctor, and of course the family members, or people who are receiving the treatment. Your thought on this, sir?
So we are doing in our center, we are using technology to continue to assess our
Mm-hmm.
patients. As I told you, for us, an early diagnosis is extremely important. And once it is done, we follow these people up. Sometimes we give them different treatment plans and strategies, and we follow up. So we are doing it online.
Mm-hmm.
So that is one useful thing that online is helping us. Prescription medicines can be given online. We have this telemedicine facility, which both Dr. Ram and I are part of. We do that where you can write prescriptions online, and the patient, it's convenient for the patient to to get. I wish there was a system by which the prescription would go to a reliable pharmacy and they would directly send the patient to the medicines to the patient. I don't know whether that's available. It's definitely not available in my services, at least. So it's not there. Otherwise, treatment-wise, for example, your center, so the interactions between the caregivers and the professionals like you, that can be done definitely online, where you can advise and guide them. You don't need to come physically in front and do that. And as you know, most people are advised not to come to ARDSI, but you can still continue that interaction, not only across on the phone or even by video and WhatsApp nowadays. So these are definite facilities which we are using, not can be used, we are using, and it entirely depends on the receiver to do that. I mean, unfortunately, sometimes people can't handle. I hear people that I don't know how to handle this, how to. So, that needs help, and they have to be helped. If you can help it over the phone, it's fine. If you can't, then that's a bit of a problem. But yes, online facilities should be used and used much more.
Wonderful. Dr. Ram, coming back to you, as you said earlier, holistic care is the key to providing effective dementia care. And we know that no single institution or an individual have the knowledge, the skills, the resources to single-handedly provide this care. However, what we see, is that there is not a strong network, or I would say communication among the team of health professionals, family caregivers, paid caregivers, and and the community as a whole in this matter. How important do you think this communication is within this network of people who are providing care to this person with dementia?
I think it is very important because, as you are aware that looking after with someone with dementia needs a lot of coordination, coordination regarding health problems, coordination regarding practical support. Again, this whole COVID pandemic has driven home the point that how community is important to look after the elderly, because when everything stopped, even the hospitals actually stopped functioning effectively, transport got stopped. It was the network of people around the elderly people who rallied around and in many situations offered help. So there has to be very active, collaboration between the doctors, the carers, NGOs. In fact, police, as you know, Pranam also is an organization which tries, despite its limitations, to look after as effectively as it can. So I think joint working, collaboration cannot be overemphasized because the needs are multiple. The needs are multiple. It's not that just one physician or doctor would be able to take care, but it is elderly have multiple needs. One of the major things which I have realized is their need for mobility. And in India, we have such poor access to everywhere that the elderly find it impossible to navigate public transport, read signs. The other major worry I really have is automated services. So if you ring a telephone provider, you would have to tap, one button after the other, and then kind of choose from a menu what your needs are. How on earth would the elderly person be able to do that? Somehow escapes me. And we are blindly following this model of digitization as if everyone is digitally literate, and the leaders who are, espousing they will never get old.
Right.
So I really despair about our blindness in acknowledging the needs for the elderly as if technology will take care of everything. But technology is not everything, as we have seen during this pandemic. We need the community beside us to kind of do, even our basic functioning. So somehow we need to be a lot more louder about the needs of the elderly, which are sadly and hugely neglected.
No doubt, no doubt. Thank you. Dr. Ghosh, your take on prevention of the condition. How would you think people should practice in their life, the prevention of the condition?
Okay, it's extremely important. So let me give you an example. In Kolkata in the last few years, there has been two major bridge issues. One was the Majerhat Bridge and the other was the Tala Bridge. And when they had to be closed down, people had to travel. And therefore what happened was roads which are not, they're used for other purposes, suddenly got started. So the main trunk road, which was the bridge road, was blocked. And therefore people were using other side roads in Alipur and in Boj, etc., or here in Paikpada, bypass the bridge. So the same thing is happening with what I told you about the network. So if you have the major, so what happens, imagine, if there was a major disaster, God forbid, between Delhi and Kolkata. Would everything stop? No. People would start using other lines. You know what happened in this pandemic situation, when up until recently the Delhi-Kolkata flights were blocked, and I think Nilanjana, you know more than anyone else. You couldn't come from Delhi, Kolkata. So what you had to do, you had to go from Delhi to maybe Bhubaneswar or Ranchi, and then from Ranchi maybe to Bagdogra, and from Bagdogra take a train to Kolkata or something like that. So you have to use of secondary pathways in that network to reach your destination. So the way to prevent dementia, you don't know you're going to have dementia. So the best way to prevent is primary prevention, that is from very early on, when you're 20s or 30s. But even when you think you're starting to forget a little bit, that is when you start strengthening your networks by strengthening the parallel pathways. And they can be done in various ways. Of course, you strengthen your blood vessels, you strengthen your nerves by strengthening the food you supply to them. So good diet, same for diabetes, same for stroke prevention and heart disease prevention. So good diet where you keep your sugar under control, you keep your pressure under control, don't take too much salt, leafy vegetables, green vegetables. In fact, one of the diets where there has been extensive research and which has been found to be particularly good for brain health is a diet called Mediterranean diet, or a variation of Mediterranean diet which is called MIND diet, M-I-N-D. You can check Google and find out about them. These diets have been found to be, by research, particularly helpful, and they're very delicious diets. We've tried that, it's very nice. It has lots of legumes and green leafy vegetables and other vegetables and olives, fish, and so and so. So diet. Secondly, your intellectual ability. So you must keep, I think what has been a disaster in a way for many of us is the Facebook and the Twitter and the WhatsApp culture, where we mostly spend our time doing ha ha he he and like, or good morning and good night and happy birthdays. That is not intellectual activity. Intellectual activity could be to make a group where you have really intellectual discussions on things like that, even if it is just political mudslinging, where you would like to kind of win your argument. So that is why the typical Bengali adda is supposed to be great. Because in Bengali addas, Bengalis love to argue for no reason. But they argue, and they argue to win that argument. So they're always using their brain, right? So that is great. So you have to continuously use your brain and try to win arguments, or do some intellectual activities. Of course, everybody doesn't do a PhD, but you can do all these things. So diet, activity, exercise, it's always stressed. Good for your heart, good for your brain, because it is good for the blood vessels. And eventually the blood vessels will carry good food and good oxygen and keep the cells of the brain and the networks healthy. So you have exercise. So all of these things, I think, crosswords, fantastic thing to do. But you can't do crossword, remember, just like you can't have a patient who is awaiting knee surgery and you don't say, chalo, sit-ups, exercise karo. Then you damage the brain and you break the bones. Exercise should have been done 20 years ago. So same for the crosswords. If you want to do crossword or something, you want to stress your brain out. So give physiotherapy, exercise your brain. That has to be done very early on. You can't do it very much later into the disease. So very early diseases. So things like that. So you have diet, you have exercise, you've got intellectual activities, brain teasers like crosswords and Sudoku and things like that. And social interactions, as I said, Adda in Bengali, or social gatherings and interactions which you enjoy. The other thing it provides is enjoyment, and that creates good hormones as well.
Absolutely, absolutely, great. The global decline concept, or a biomedical lens to see a person with dementia, is challenged now. The newer perspective recognizes that the performance, the behavior, and the quality of life of persons with dementia are determined not only by neuropathology, but also by their personal histories, their interactions with others, and how they are perceived within their social context. Dr. Ram, how much do you agree here? Any personal experience to share?
No, I think I entirely agree. You know, what Amitabh said right at the beginning, one of the things is that, you know, one of my favorite comedians is a person called Groucho Marx. He said once that none of us are prepared for two things in life, that is death and taxes. Now, I would like to paraphrase him and say that none of us also are prepared for old age, you know, because we believe that we will continue to function as we are in our 20s, 30s, 40s, and we really don't prepare ourselves with social investment, with financial investment, and make plans when we will not be as functional as we are. So therefore, it's incredibly important to create a network of social investment, friends, families, kind of have hobbies and activities which will keep us alive, keep our brains alive, keep our humanity alive. Because beyond a point, our work career ends. And after that, what we are left with, and with in longevity increasing, many of us do in fact live for 20, 25 or 30 years when our main occupation is no longer needed. You know, so women who are working, men who are working, they would have retired. If I was within a family context, if I was a homemaker, my children and grandchildren no longer need me. So therefore, we need to make a lot more of social investment and think that these are the things which will help me in old age, and do things which give us a sense of purpose. I'll just give you a very small example. I once met an elderly lady who participated in a gay pride march because her grandchild, she was actually a very active member of one of the organizations, and she was in her early 70s, and I cannot tell you how thrilled the granddaughter was when the granddaughter and the grandmother walked hand in hand in a gay pride march. I know a lot of grandparents who contribute in an organization which I'm very closely associated with, called Autism Society of West Bengal. And they offer their time, energy in contributing in building this organization. So there are many ways, I think, someone who is in leading a retired life has got no active, what would I say, work within the household context, can contribute, engage with other things which will give them a sense of purpose. And I think we need to be creative about it. We need to be opening our mind about it and plan for it from at an age when we are, still able to look up new things and take up new activities.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So combining both your and Dr. Ghosh's professional and personal interest in this disease condition, what would be your closing remark, Dr. Ghosh?
I think my closing remark is very plain and simple. Do not ignore early signs of forgetfulness. It is very likely that you will never have dementia. But the small chance that you have, if you don't ignore the signs of forgetfulness, then we get a chance. And if we get a chance, you get a chance to prevent it from happening or to slow it down from happening. And that's very, very important, because the more we delay, the more we are going into that path of no return. So that's very important. Early diagnosis, don't miss.
Thank you. Dr. Ram?
I think we need to be prepared individually and as a potential carer. And because we don't know when this will hit us, when we would have to look after someone. But I think with longevity increasing, we all need to be prepared and invest in our knowledge about dementia, in helping out if we know that there is someone next door to us who has dementia. And I think preparation is the best thing which we can do to make lives of people with dementia a lot better. And individually also, if we are psychologically prepared for old age, I'm not saying everyone will have dementia, but see, old age problems will happen with longevity increasing. And I think we need to be prepared for all the old age problems which can and will hit us. So preparation is the key.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. As a dementia care professional myself for over 2 decades now, the one single lesson that changed my view of dementia care was from this 83-year-old husband caring for his wife of 47 years, when he told me, and I quote him, "Yes, she's gone, but she still remains and is powerfully present in my thoughts and memories. Her past lives on in her smile, her frown, the way she raises her eyebrows every time I raise my voice. She might not recognize me, but I can recognize her, and that's about it." So wrapping up, I believe this conversation has helped build a valuable picture of how the condition can affect people, brought out a spectrum of different experiences at different stages, from the diagnosis to the impact on relationships and finding hope and companionship. Thank you, Dr. Ghosh and Dr. Ram, for presenting your thoughts. It has surely given us insight into the what should I say, complexities of dementia. Now, for the comments, questions from the audience, I will just go through the first question that has come from Dr. Shubhangshu. How can we, family members, deal with challenging psychosocial situations where others tend to believe that the person having dementia is doing it intentionally in order to manipulate them, get attention, merely create nuisance?
I think education really. I don't think there is. I don't think anyone who knows, will reads about and finds out about dementia will not be able to understand this. And there are plenty of examples to draw from films, to draw from uh, books, to draw from important characters in history to show that people change because of dementia, and it is not a deliberate behavior problem. Like any other, like any other illness, really, we need to just convince this point. And I often tell parents or carers that it will happen to all of us, so don't get angry and upset.
Thank you. Dr. Ghosh, how is FTD unique? How to detect it clinically? Through signs, symptoms, history, neurological examination, brain imaging, blood test, any specific guideline regarding management of challenging psychosocial situations cropping around people suffering from FTD, not dementia in general? That's the question.
Right. Let's say that requires a long answer. So FTD diagnosis. FTD is called frontotemporal dementia, by the way, which is the front of the brain, which deals with two important things. One is how we conduct. So imagine a regulator of a fan, which conducts your speed of the fan and so on. So the brain has a regulator, and the regulator of the brain is the front of the brain, or the frontal lobe. It's a very, very advanced part of the brain, which regulates our actions, not only how we move our hands and legs and fingers and so and so, but also how we regulate our behavior with people, our social behavior. And I have referred this to, if you were in the meeting earlier, I had discussed that in fairly fair details about how behavior. So the frontal lobes deal with that. It also deals with something very important that is called executive function. That is the term we use. Basically, complex decision-making processes. So imagine a big executive in a big office sitting. The decisions they have to take, and you put decisions like that, if you put that in your own home and family. So you know how much to pay, when to pay, what is the decision, when to give the tax, where to keep things, how to organize stuff. All of these decisions, they're called executive functions. Frontal lobe deals with executive functions. So if you're damaged in your frontal lobe, then you've socially broken down behavior. You're behaving in ways which embarrass your family. And you're also completely disorganized and in a complete disarray. You don't know where you've kept things. You're all cluttered. You can't take decisions. So that is what the frontal lobe does. And the frontotemporal dementia, that is primarily affected. And memory is affected. So when you have a frontotemporal dementia, you will have patients who will come with memory problems. But the memory problems can also be because I'm not organizing my thoughts in my mind properly. I'm not stacking them properly.
Right.
Not attending to things. So attention is not there because my behavior is always distracted. And so therefore I forget. It's not Alzheimer's disease. And also, in different types of frontotemporal dementias, you have difficulty with naming people and recognizing people and so on. So when you do an MRI scan on these people, you will find shrinkage in the front part of the brain, the frontal lobe and the temporal lobe as it is. That is why it's called frontotemporal dementia. Unfortunately, blood test-wise, there is nothing we have for frontotemporal dementia. There is one test called AAA. It looks at a particular protein level which is related with a gene, but that is very rare in India. In fact, frontotemporal dementia is supposed to be one of the dementias which pass through families, right? But the genes involved are the genes which we find in the white people, the Caucasians. We don't find those genes in Indians or in most of Asia. So therefore, those even those one or two blood tests which are available are not of much use. What we do are not blood tests at the moment. We are doing MRI scans and different types of PET scans of the brain if required to identify regions of the brain which are under functioning. Sometimes where you have facility, in my center, we are trying to do that. You can do lumbar punctures to do a protein test which tells you it is not Alzheimer's disease. So it's a negative. So behavior problem, not Alzheimer's disease, very likely to be FTD. So things like that. Of course, you rule out other diseases. Right. So that is how you do that. Blood tests are coming, but not there as yet. Treatment, the main treatment for frontotemporal dementia is treating the family, as Dr. Ram and I have been telling you, that it's how the family should deal with this very difficult situation when you have disrupted behavior and how you're going to deal with it. So that is something we guide them. Minimum medicines, in fact, medicines for Alzheimer's disease sometimes does exactly the opposite in frontotemporal dementia and makes behavior worse. So we have to make sure of that. There's a tendency to give a lot of what we call antipsychotics, but antipsychotics can sometimes be life-threatening. That is something we need to remember. Those have to be controlled. So medicine-wise, we are kind of, again, in a rather difficult situation. A lot of research is going on, a lot of research on frontotemporal dementia medications, but we are far from actually having those medicines in the market.
Right. Thank you so much. Dr. Ram, there's a question that I think you would like to address, which is, why is dementia not as sensitized as other mental health problems like depression?
I don't think it is. I think there is, I think we would blame it, sorry, just let me, we would blame it on, again, on the physician community, really. That, and as I said, I think a lot of the old age problems are normalized. Many of us would think it is normal behavior for the elderly to forget, not to be productive, becoming a bit of cranky. And I think that is the biggest problem, which we need to make everyone realize that dementia is a disease where quality of life can be significantly improved if we intervene early. So I think there is a lack of awareness simply because we think a lot of these old age behaviors are normal and we just ignore them, and kind of at times leads to elder abuse.
Right. And there's another question that says, how to address the depression in caregivers?
I think that's a complex, there are many ways. We have, I think, again, rather than summarizing it here, I think there are many ways. I think first acknowledging the depression in caregivers and telling them that they can get help, and then treating it like any other depression, keeping in mind that the burden of care is enormous. I think acknowledging, accepting the burden of care, organizing practical support for people who are suffering from depression, and then treating depression in whatever way we would like to, I think is important.
Okay. There's a question for Dr. Ghosh. Anything in particular that triggers dementia?
Interesting. So, yes, there are a lot of things. I think one of the commonest triggers we find is post-retirement or post some major event in the family. I refer to two things. One is marriage in the family, typically daughter's marriage, or someone left the family after a long time, or retirement, or some other thing which psychologically impacts you. So there's a big loss, financial loss. That can act as a trigger. Of course, there are many other triggers. Uncontrolled diabetes can be a trigger. A head injury is a common trigger. It could be a minor head injury, and he was absolutely fine and nothing happened, and then he bumped his head and was a little dazed for some time, and after that particular day we started noticing forgetfulness, and so on. So that can act as a trigger. Strokes can act as a trigger. So certain physical or emotional events of importance can do that. And one person I remember had a big drop in, on a particular blood pressure medicine can make sodium levels drop. And this person had a big drop in sodium levels. And then that was corrected. And from then on, it was noticed that she was getting forgetfulness. The interesting thing is, that is not the cause of forgetfulness. So these networks I was talking about were slowly drying up for a long time. But this trigger suddenly acted as a critical thing where the whole thing suddenly exposed itself. Right? And from then on, it started progressing. So there was a balance, but suddenly that balance goes and it starts progressing. That happens in a lot of medical diseases, not only in dementia. So those triggers are there. Many others triggers, but these are common things to remember.
And what's the fine line between forgetfulness in an elderly person and dementia? That fine line.
Yes. So as you age, you tend to forget things. That is normal because my brain is aging as much as my hair is aging and my skin is aging and my, everything is aging. But that aging is happening in tandem. So my brain's age and my skin's age and my teeth's age are all the same. Now, if for some reason the progression of the brain degeneration becomes faster than the rest of me, then an imbalance is created. That imbalance becomes noticeable because I was not supposed to do that. Why am I forgetting so much? I was not supposed to forget that. When I speak to my friends, they say, oh, no, we forget. I know I forget names. We all forget names. We forget where we kept our keys, where we kept our mobile every day. But those are normal levels of forgetfulness. But if the forgetfulness exceeds what is normal for my age and gets noticed either by myself or by my family member, then that is, I'm still not saying that becomes a cognitive impairment by definition, but that becomes a trigger to get tested to see if I'm developing mild cognitive problems. Most mild cognitive problems will not develop dementia at least in the next 6 to 8 years. But some of them will. And because some of them will, maybe about 10% or 8%, in community maybe 12 to 15%. It is because of that we need to keep checking.
There's another question. My father has vascular dementia. How much at risk am I when I reach old age? And if yes, what can I, of course, do to prevent and avoid it?
Well, that's very nice you asked. You're not at risk of vascular dementia, but remember, we as a country is a family of diabetics, right? So please make sure, keep yourself checked every year. Make sure that you don't have diabetes, control your blood pressure. And the questions where we answered how to control dementia, how to prevent, this is the time that you start following that. Your diet, your exercise, please stop smoking. Don't drink alcohol beyond social drinking. I forgot these two, very important. Smoking is a disaster. Please stop smoking. There's no excuse for that, right? So that your intellectual activities, your social interactions, keep yourself socially surrounded. Dr. Ram has referred to that as well. It's very important. At one point of time, we will get old and we need to have that circle of friends we can interact. Very important. So yes, I think WhatsApp and Facebook are allowing to do that, but also bring in a little bit of intellectual activity in it. So yes, but otherwise you're not at genetic risk for vascular dementia most of the time. There are some vascular dementias which are genetic, but we won't discuss that today. In general, you're not.
There's a question that this gentleman is asking. I'm 63. Normally I forget about films, even that I have seen 6 months ago, and likewise, I am unable to remember my dreams this happening since about 10 years. Is this early symptom?
No, you're not. It's good to remember your dreams. We all, most of us won't remember our dreams. Sometimes you do, but in the most, you don't remember your dreams. A bit of forgetfulness. I just told you, you're 63. There will be a little bit of forgetfulness because of your age. But if you think it is progressing, or you think it's beyond what others forget, get yourself checked. Simple as that. Most of the time, it turns out to be nothing. But just like I think the way of putting it is, your memory check should be part of your health check. Unfortunately, no hospital has this, and I told my hospital to do that as well, but they couldn't institute it, probably partly because of the COVID and other things. But the memory check should also be part of the health check. In fact, as much as the check of your anxiety, depression, and things like that, it should be part of the health check. I don't know why we don't do that.
Absolutely, because brain is as important part of the body as any other part. So I think it's high time we did that. There's another question: if dementia or Alzheimer's disease is genetic, then do the sons and daughters who are also carers need to go for brain MRI in case they suffer from anxiety attacks and forgetfulness?
Yes. So Alzheimer's disease. The genetic, when we speak of genetic, the genetic transmission, there is those who have done biology, there's something called Mendelian transmission, where it's transmitted from one generation to the next generation directly, father to son, or mother to son, or daughter, or whichever way. So that is a transmission which is called autosomal dominant transmission, right? So from generation 1 to generation 2. Generation 2 to generation 3. In Alzheimer's disease, that is less than 2 to 3%. So over 97% of Alzheimer's disease do not have that type of genetic transmission. There are some genes that all of us have, which can modify if we have a tendency to develop Alzheimer's disease. Same for diabetes. If there are tendency, there are genes which modify the diabetes will come faster. So same for Alzheimer's disease, but there is no direct genetic transmission. So just because someone has it doesn't mean that you run a high risk. There's another dementia called frontotemporal dementia, which we had referred to just a little while earlier, which is much stronger autosomal dominant genetic transmission. But even so, in the West, in the Caucasians, the white people, it is almost on an average of 40%, 30 to 50%. In our country, for example, in my group, and I have a pretty large group of frontotemporal dementia patients, it is around 26%. So almost half of the genetic transmission which happens in the white people seems to occur in Indians. And I have colleagues working in Asia, which has shown even less than that. So the risk of transmission is there in FTD, but it is less. Question is whether you should do an MRI when you feel anxious. Again, let me tell you, although we are speaking of dementia, this is to enlighten all of you about the need to understand what memory problems are and what dementia is, and so and so. Just because I have an anxiety or depression does not mean that I'm going to have dementia. So just anxiety and depression is definitely no indication to have an MRI scan. If somebody has a late onset anxiety and they come and get checked, and in the process of checking, we take the history. We were discussing a long, lengthy history to you sometime earlier. And in the process of history, we find out there are some things which may be concerning us. In those patients, we will do a neuropsychological assessment. And yes, in them, we will do memory tests. We will do MRI scans or PET scans or other scans, but not for every anxiety, depression. Please don't worry.
There are two questions around just dementia, which is, I'm 47, I forget names. Is that an early sign?
So forgetting names, as I said, is pretty common. I've been forgetting names forever.
I don't even bother. I myself don't bother to remember at first, to begin with.
You're very right. So there are different kind of brain makeups, if you may. In some brain makeups, you simply don't remember names. It's not important to your brain to remember names, right? In some, they remember names like the back of their hand. Both are normal. There's nothing wrong. Unless it is progressing, unless it is kind of really becoming more frequent and effective or beginning to affect functioning on our other domains are being affected as well. That is when you worry, otherwise don't. And if you have anxiety, if you have a little bit of depression, your forgetfulness for names would worsen. So it's okay. But
is dementia, right? Is dementia an only old age problem?
Is dementia an only old age? No. Dr. Ram spoke to you about that before, that we always think, a lot of people think dementia is just an old age problem. It definitely is not. Dementia is a breakdown of the networks, which we say pathological, means that is something which is producing significant damage to our brain functioning. In old age, you can have people who are 90, 92, who are old and who have the sharpest memory, enormously sharper than what we have. Old age produces forgetfulness, which is in keeping with that age. It is not dementia. It is the progression. That is dementia. But yes, early forgetfulness, anything which makes you worry that I'm forgetting, I'm getting old and I'm forgetting, and I keep harping back, I'm sorry, I'm just going back to that over and over again. If you think you're forgetting, you're beginning to forget too much and you're worrying, I need to get checked. Just like a health check, where we check our blood sugar and the blood pressure and the urine and so on. So every year or every 2 years or whatever, get a memory check. There's no harm in doing that. Get that done. Be happy.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I think for now, this is the last question I have for you, which is, she wants to know this oil called CBD, which has been proved in the US to curb anxiety and rage in dementia persons. Do we have access to this in India or an alternative?
CBT?
CBD.
E for Tokyo.
No, it's D for Delhi.
CBD. And what was your question again?
The question is, this oil is supposedly helping, it has been proved in the US to curb anxiety and rage. Do we have access to this in India or an alternative?
I don't know, but if there is a treatment like that for anxiety, Dr. Rao would be the right person to answer that.
That's right. Unfortunately, he had to leave, so maybe I will find out from him and get back to you on this.
Yes.
There's the last question here. Has there been cases of dementia found in children?
Yes, indeed. So different things can cause dementia. So, children forgetfulness are of different types. But some children with brain problems and brain damages of different types from childhood can have dementia, right? But a classical example, we won't go into that. That's a completely different thing altogether. We won't go into that. But one classical example is children who have a disease called Down syndrome. So Down syndrome is a genetic disease where you have problem with one of the particular the genes, and patients with Down syndrome, they are born with so their intellectual abilities are not the same as children of their age, and they also have different facial features and so on. So Down syndrome patients invariably almost develop Alzheimer's disease at a very early age. They develop Alzheimer's disease well before 40 years of age. So that is one case which you should know. It's not that everybody's having Down syndrome. It's not a common disease. But otherwise, anything which produces significant brain damage in the brain, it could be encephalitis, it could be head injury, it could be so many other, different genetic disease and metabolic diseases in the brain. They can produce, yes, dementia and cognitive problems. But they are not common.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Ghosh. I think there are a lot of comments that it has been a wonderful session, and a lot of important subjects have been addressed, and grateful for your and Dr. Ram's participation. So thank you, audience, for your comments, your questions. So I will end with an appeal to all listening today. Please help us reach out to every person with dementia and their caregivers, and create a society where those affected are supported, accepted, and treated equally, and especially now when pandemic has forced isolation in our lives more than ever before. May we all look forward to an amazing time ahead for people with dementia and their family caregivers, and promise to deliver nothing but the best. So thank you, Dr. Ghosh. Thank you, Dr. Ram. He had to leave to get to something urgent. So thank you both. Grateful for you, able to join us. And good night, everyone. Thank you once again for joining. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ghosh.
Bye-bye.
Bye.